Doug, is anyone truly ahead on this stuff, or is it just a lot of noise on LinkedIn?
Hit it! That's what I'm talking about. Wait!
Okay, now, from the beginning.
Hit it, boys.
Welcome to Higher Ed Pulse, your no-fluff guide to artificial intelligence in higher ed. I'm Mallory Wilsey, bringing nearly 20 years of edtech and marketing expertise straight to your earbuds. Higher ed leaders are expected to master AI overnight, but let's be real, no one has time to sift through every headline, hot take, or research report. That's why every Monday I'll break down what actually matters, fast, clear, and to the point. Want to sound like the smartest person in the room at your next team meeting? You're in the right place. Let's dive in. Welcome back to Higher Ed Pulse. Today's episode is a reality check. Agentic AI is everywhere in your LinkedIn feed. Autonomous agents and team replacements, end-to-end workflows. It really does sound like this magic wand. But inside enterprise environments, y'all, it's still messy. It breaks, it overreaches, and it needs supervision. And that's actually good news for higher ed. My guest today is Doug Gopinski, an account director at 8th Light, where he helps enterprise organizations design and deliver complex software systems that hold up under real world pressure. He's spent his career translating ambitious digital ideas into operational reality, from project strategy and UX to large-scale modernization efforts. Before 8th Light, Doug led product and experience work at Artifact and M. Stoner. We are both M. Stoner alums. Doug, yes, was indeed a former colleague of mine at that lovely little agency. He has partnered with higher ed institutions closely during the most major digital transformations. Doug, welcome to the Pulse.
Hey, thanks, Mallory. Thanks so much. It's great to be here. Glad to talk about agents today.
Nice. Yeah, it is truly overdue having you as a guest, because I'm going to say it out loud. I'm going to say it on record and on air. You were one of my top 3 colleagues when I was at M. Stoner, and we worked with a lot of really great people. So.
Oh yeah, no, I'm so glad to hear that back at you. You were a constant source of inspiration in terms of social content and how to do that well for businesses. And happy reunion, I guess I would say.
Yeah, I agree. Happy reunion indeed. And in fact, speaking of social content, I saw you posting recently about your Orange Theory fitness journey. I kind of want to know more about this. Listeners know I'm a fitness instructor, and so anytime I get to talk a little fitness shop with my guest, I always take it.
Yeah, I'm a couple years into being an Orange Theory junkie. If you don't know, it's a methodology that's sort of similar to CrossFit or F45, but kind of centered on treadmill work, rowing, and then floor work, which is sometimes weights and sometimes body weight circuits. I'm super into it. I'm doing the body transformation challenge right now, trying to get down to 14% body fat, which is tough for a guy who's maybe a little bit older than he looks. But yeah, I'm super, I see some of your social content around cycling. I saw last year you had a couple of videos that went viral, and I want to be more like you in that way. But that's aspirational for me right now.
It's so important to focus on wellness, isn't it? I don't think that we sometimes talk with our colleagues enough about those kinds of things. And I'm such a big proponent of bringing your whole self to any job that you're in. And so doesn't that include all of those important wellness activities too? So I think that's awesome that you're posting about it, Doug.
Kudos to you. No, I appreciate it, and back at you. And I agree. And I think I feel like society at large seems to be taking health a little bit more seriously than when I was younger. And I'm glad to find people like you that are on a similar quest.
Yeah. Oh, and not that I was looking for a reason to plug the Let's Go Upstate retreat that I'm co-hosting with our friend Ashley Budd. But part of the development of this retreat was that sometimes we leave conferences physically ill because you've just been run ragged for 2-3 days, and wellness is not a component and for many reasons is not a component of large scale conferences. But that was a non-negotiable for us in the Let's Go Upstate retreat because of these trends and mindfulness shifts that are happening all around us. So wasn't looking for the opportunity, but can't not take it.
Yeah,
Anyway.
no, that's awesome. I'm glad you're baking that in, and glad to hear Ashley's on board. And tell her I said hi.
Well, when she listens to this episode, she'll hear it for herself.
All right.
But
Hi, Ashley.
speaking of this episode, Doug, we got to get into our topic at hand. This is, I think, now my third episode this calendar year on Agentic AI. So that tells you something. That tells you that Artist Cadu said it back in January, like 2026 is the year of AI agents. But I think right now, if you go to LinkedIn, like the posts you might see make it feel like Agentic AI is already running entire companies, that they have deployed these autonomous agents that have replaced teams and have 10x productivity. And, when you look at what's actually happening inside environments, especially enterprise ones, I think the story is a little less dramatic than that. Agentic AI works in narrow lanes, structured workflows, clean data environments, clear boundaries, but it struggles with ambiguity. It hallucinates, it oversteps authority, and it really requires guardrails, monitoring, and someone accountable on the other side of the workflow. And none of those LinkedIn bros are screaming about that online, okay? But if you are a listener and you work on a campus or at an organization that is working with campuses, you probably feel overwhelmed, underfunded, understaffed, and like late to the agentic game. Y'all, pause. We are early. No one has lapped the field yet. So instead of asking, how do we catch up? Today, Doug and I are going to ask questions like, where does agentic AI actually work? Where does it not work? And what the heck actually is it? So Doug, we're going to start right there. Everyone's talking about this thing called agentic AI, including me. In the real world, what does that actually mean?
Yeah, so it could be an app. It could be a decision engine within an app, but it's basically a bot that can be given an objective. It can plan intermediate steps. It can call tools or APIs that it has permissions to access. Things like, Google Sheets or Google Docs for most people, but also enterprise tools, right? Some agents can be given access to SaaS tools like HubSpot or Salesforce. An agent can observe results that it's acting on, and it can revise its plan and continue. I think it's also worth calling out, like, for people that have been around for a while, you may be like, oh, bots aren't new, agents aren't new. And you're partially right. I think there's been three things that have really entered the frame that are kind of changing the conversation around agents. And the first is that agents can use LLMs in the same way a human can. And that's a big deal, right? Because bots and agents that sort of predated LLMs were using rules engine, or they were using low-level code to make decisions. So if you've used LLMs of any kind, whether that's Gemini or Claude or GPT, you've probably noticed that they're pretty powerful. And now imagine that you have these bots that can basically access that same set of tools and use them. The second kind of trend out there that gets a lot of traction on LinkedIn is multi-agent orchestration, which is basically, it just means there's a bunch of bots working together. And usually in a setup like that, it's being configured by a developer. The agents have well-defined roles. Like you might have one that's called the developer agent who actually writes code. Another agent might be a QA person, and they're responsible for reviewing the code created by the first agent. You might have one that's called project manager that's sort of keeping a log of the work that's done and what QA changes are made. And that multi-agent setup is relatively new as well. Some people were doing it with the more primitive tools, but LLMs really open up the throttle and the ability to have agents that work together. And I think the last thing that's really new is access to tools that make it really easy to set up agents. So for a layperson or somebody who's, as an account person, I'm a little bit less technical. There's tools out there like Zapier or Agent.ai that allow you to basically create an account in minutes, start setting up your own agents, it's not going to be that kind of multi-agent orchestration, but it is going to be an easy way to set up an agent and sort of play with it and give it access to a spreadsheet and start trying to test out what of your own work can you automate. So yeah, I think when we say agentic AI, a lot of people are probably familiar with working with an LLM like GPT or Claude to kind of ask it questions. This is really about setting up a bot or an automated system that can access the same toolkit.
Nice. So if you mentioned these multi-agents, that you can orchestrate, if you read LinkedIn, it sounds like they're running an entire companies. Like literally the folks who work at the AI companies are telling us to be very worried. And I always question that because I'm like, it's not that simple, right? Like it's not running an entire company. There are still humans who are working there who are doing really good work. So like, what are we all getting wrong on this? Like, yeah.
You mean what are investors in the stock market getting wrong
Okay,
right now?
fair.
As, SaaS stock just falls by the minute. I think there's kind of like a bundle of ideas about what the market is sort of underestimating right now as they sort of anticipate that SaaS will be fully destabilized. One is overestimating how far agents are along. We can talk about some more specific ways. I think you have some questions that are designed to poke on that in a little bit, but it is not mature tech. I think that it's worth remembering that agents can only act on knowledge that they have access to. And I think that in many cases, people are overestimating how much knowledge is tacit or implicit, where tacit knowledge is, it's kind of like ideas that people have or knowledge they have that isn't easily explainable. And implicit is easier to explain, but it's knowledge that a worker might think is invisible or assumed to other workers. And because agents can't act on those two types of knowledge or cultural knowledge of an institution, they're really limited in terms of they need really explicit instructions. They need access to documents that they can parse. They need access to data to be able to do anything good. And their lack of ability to have access to those things that inform judgment really limits what they're capable of doing. What else maybe does LinkedIn underestimate in terms of what agents can do? There's distinct failure modes that don't necessarily exist with humans. Agents can have something called goal drift, which is basically where in the process of breaking down an objective it's been given, an agent can start basically breaking a task they can decompose a task and break it into smaller bits. And as part of interpreting the LLM that's behind them, they might naturally experience kind of a drift in what they're trying to accomplish that happens from this process. It's a very non-human process, but it's sort of like, imagine that you've given a junior an assignment and you're like, hey, do this thing for the next day. And you show up the next day and you're like, all right, what'd you get done yesterday? And they're like, well, I got all these things done. And you're like, oh my God, you did the wrong thing for the last day. It's not dissimilar to that, right? But it's happening based on a machine's interpretation of an LLM rather than a human misunderstanding the assignment. I think that really where most orgs are at is automating slices and experimenting with agents, but a notion that you can get to that sort of $1 billion valued company right now in agents alone is pretty silly, in my opinion. So,
what I'm hearing you say though is that like agents kind of need all the things that humans need, like access to resources, access to data, clear instructions, like some human oversight and guardrails from the boss. And so my understanding is when those things are not in place, like agentic AI does break and it does overstep, and you're alluding to some of that. Do you have some examples of, maybe you've seen this happen?
I mean, I feel like in your intro, you said something along the lines of, AI is fragile where ambiguity is high and there's high consequences. So I kind of think of that in terms of, your core audience, which is higher ed. Where is it fragile? Compliance heavy processes, places like financial aid, visa status, ADA recommendations. These are places where there's a lot of edge cases and there's potentially big consequences for making the wrong decisions. That doesn't mean you can't have an agent involved in like data organization or data assessment. It kind of just means you don't want the agent making the decision for you, right? So that comes back to like, what is it that you're asking this automation or this agent to do for you? And I think it's a really important thing to retain that you want it acting more like a junior than a decision maker. You want it preparing things for you or simplifying processes that are super manual so that you can be faster at making the right decision as a human. What else in higher ed might qualify as a sensitive area? Like, an admissions funnel where there's usually a pretty well-developed set of processes. Totally fine for an agent to handle marketing content that's going to a student. But you also need to understand, like, it's going to act, again, on the data that it has access to. So if your data hygiene isn't good around what part of the funnel a student's in, the agent's probably going to make the wrong decisions about what to send them. And again, in admissions being a kind of area where there might be a lot of tensions in who gets admitted and who doesn't, humans should still be making those decisions. And it's okay if the machine is preparing the data and kind of even making a recommendation, but the human should still be looking at it and making the choice.
Yeah, I think that's a great example for sure. Very relevant. And also a place where AI has already entered into many institutions' processes. So I bet there's a lot of nodding heads right now. Doug, I would love to hear, you've left the higher ed world for some time, and especially in your role at 8th Light. Do you have some examples of like enterprise use cases where agentic AI is working today? We've talked about them at pretty high level or as hypotheticals, but like I would like a real company, real example, and why was it the right environment or use case for agentic?
Yeah, I got two examples to mention. So one's for a
overachiever.
Well, they're different. So I thought they were both interesting, and I think maybe the latter they're both potentially relevant in higher ed, but we'll see. The first one is a kind of legacy database migration. Why is that work well suited to agents? Because it's about transcribing entities, like really well understood data entities from one place to another. Now, this particular database has a bunch of Snowflake instances, so there's a lot of custom instructions that have to go to the agents, like based on different segments that they're transcribing to the new database. But if you think about it, migrating data from one database to another is not something that most humans really want to do. It's very structured, it's very rule-bound. There's really clear success criteria. There's ability to compare the entity in the old database to the new one. It's repeatable. The roles are really easy to define, like in terms of how the orchestration is set up. And the environment is very controlled. So that is a great use case for agents where I like talking about that one because I feel like we're not replacing labor that humans would actually want to do.
For sure.
And I think the other example is basically an intelligence system that we built for a holding company and some of the companies underneath it, where it's a set of agents that basically scour a bunch of sources, some of them public and some of them private, to come up with daily intelligence briefings for leadership. So think of it as a more advanced version of what RSS feeds used to do, where some team might share an RSS feed and be expected to look at it. These agents kind of look at trends and different data sources, and they compose these sort of daily intelligence briefings that go to about 4,000 different people within the company. And again, it is a bounded, finite task with good data sources. It is doing work faster than a human can to kind of come up with information that's useful. And the stakes for an error are really low. This is sort of like what happens if it draws the wrong conclusion? Somebody gets a broken link, or they get the wrong, maybe the wrong idea about what happened yesterday, but it's not a student being denied financial aid or a student being admitted to an institution when maybe they weren't qualified to be, So
I'm wondering if you have any like boring use cases, like, because actually neither of those examples were boring to me. Like they're both very interesting. I see the application immediately, but as I've talked to folks this year about agentic AI, it just does keep kind of coming back to these like internal processes that have clear guardrails, are repeatable, bounded tasks, clear lanes, clear like it worked or it didn't, right? You kind of worked your way through that checklist too in those two examples. But like, what's the most boring one that you've seen in terms of application?
I could tell you about a really boring one that I'm working on for myself,
Okay.
which is an agent that I'm setting up with Zapier. And I'm sort of required to keep certain metrics and certain questions answered for each of my projects, right? And there's a variety of reasons for that. One is I need to be able to keep my boss appraised of what I'm doing. I need the executives to have some visibility into my work. But I maintain these things that are sort of almost like content models about the projects. And the agent that I'm setting up is basically equipped to turn those into case study slides that we can also use for business development, because it really doesn't make sense for me to be managing the content twice when I can sort of go, I'm going to have all the relevant details of the project in one place. The act of composing a case study is usually about paring that content down, thinking about the core audience, and then putting it in a format that's less like a spreadsheet and more like a slide. So a really boring thing that probably saves me about 25 hours every half year. But if you start to do these things across the board, you're materially saving your time and avoiding some of the work that you really probably don't want to be doing or could be doing more efficiently.
Yeah.
So.
Wow, that's great. So listeners, boring does not mean not transformative because that is real time saving. And I can see how that can scale up if you start applying that. So Zapier, I got to go pay attention to their agentic AI tools because I have not done that yet. Doug, I want to flip things. Where is agentic AI not ready, right? Like, what are the workflows that listeners need to just keep out of the agent's hands, at least for now?
Yeah, I mean, I think places where there's a high degree of tensions, value tensions, and decision making. So, like in higher ed terms, I think about in admissions as you're reviewing applicants, you might make human choices to optimize for yield, revenue, for the person's academic profile, for access, or for diversity. It's anybody who's actually had to evaluate applications, even with the assistance of a SaaS solution, they understand that there's tensions in these things, right? And for me, it kind of goes back to asking the engine or asking the agent to prepare the data for you, and less with them actually making the decision for you. So I think I don't trust AI in most cases to actually make those kinds of decisions where there's tensions in the values. Like financial aid, again, is another one where there could be a lot of tensions because you're trying to think about net revenue for the college or university. You're also thinking about access, fairness, and compliance, right? And I think we're at a point in human history where we're sort of, if you believe the hype, you're dramatically overestimating the ability that an agent has to balance those tensions. And long way of saying I trust a human to balance those tensions better than an agent.
So if I am going to walk down the path of bringing agentic AI into my institution, unit, team, personal workflow, whatever it might be. From our conversation, I have picked up that you got to do some stuff in advance in order to get yourself ready. And I think the thing that's jumped out most to me is like the health of your data and the cleanliness of it, because that is one of the key resources that agent is going to have access to. And we've talked about some of those like, oh, shit scenarios already. But beyond data cleanliness, like what does implementation really require?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of think about a lot of things in this area. I think that where I would invite people to start in thinking about execution or spinning up their own experiment is, what is a place that you can start that's really low stakes until you get better at implementing agents? And again, going back to ask the agent to prepare stuff for you to review. Don't ask them to make decisions. Or if you are going to ask for something that's closer to a decision, ask them for recommendations and ask them to back the logic for you. So I think having a well-defined process is really important. Like in my, one of the reasons why that boring example I gave is such a good one is that the process is really simple. I'm kind of asking the agent to look at a data source, which is a spreadsheet. I'm asking it to look at a Google slide, which is a template. And I'm saying, periodically, once a week, I want you to look at the data source to see what updates have been made. And I want you to either reflect those in slides you've already created, or if I've added a new tab, I want you to spin up a new slide to represent that new work. So the fact that I could describe that process to you in 15, 30 seconds makes it an ideal place for experimentation. If your explanation of your process takes 5 minutes, that's probably going to create problems for you to try to spin up a fleet of agents and do the orchestration around that, because the process really has to be well defined in addition to the data sources being clean. So yeah, I think trying to set up approval thresholds is good too. Like that's a thing to think about is if the activity goes any level beyond just migrating data, when do you want the machine or when do you want the agent to flag it back to you as the human reviewer? And yeah, trying to keep humans in a healthy spot in relationship to machines means we still get to make the choices.
It's coming back to that wellness conversation from 20 minutes ago, right? We gotta stay like fit.
Or
in
maybe
order
I'm
to
just
make the
worried about my own job. Yeah, I don't know. Like humans are really, really important. Like it's hard to, I keep hitting that note.
Yeah. So from where you sit, Doug, is anyone truly ahead on this stuff, or is it just a lot of noise on LinkedIn?
I mean, who's really ahead? I mean, this is kind of half a joke and half not. The SaaS companies selling agentic solutions are ahead. I think that,
but they still have people working at them, for the record. Like they didn't, fire all
No.
of their humans.
Yeah,
there.
totally. I don't see a lot of organizations being ahead in the transformative sense, unless you want to say productivity gains are transformative, which I suppose it kind of depends on the magnitude, right? I think where a lot of places are at is beginning to middle of the curve, which is either you're starting to run experiments, you're seeing some gains from it. Those, again, are productivity gains. They're not changing the way that you generate revenue or the way that you leverage a market, but they're helping you do tasks faster, right? And then I think that the sort of slightly more mature version of that is you have teams actually working with agent fleets together to bring benefits at the team level. And that goes back to that example I gave about database migration, where there's basically, I think there's about 12 contributors, human contributors on that project, and they're doing some manual coding, but they're also kind of collectively babysitting and fine-tuning the agent fleet that's doing a lot of the migration as well. So yeah, I would say productivity gains at the individual and team level is really where we're at. And you should not, again, to where you started, you shouldn't feel bad if you haven't made your first agent or something like that. But it's a great time to dip your toes in and start using some of the tools that are available.
For sure. So, Doug, as we wrap up, if you were advising a higher ed president right now, what's one thing that they should absolutely do in the next year around agentic AI? And what's one thing that they should absolutely not do?
Yeah, I mean, if I were the president of the university, I think what I would do is spin up a couple of pilots, identify some areas that are, we'll say, low to middle stakes, the other thing that's easily in range for most institutions is trying out or demoing some of these tools that have agentic capability within them. That's a great place to start. What should they not do? I think that making assumptions about the productivity gains is really that might be sort of a false start. And sort of planning on staff reductions, hopefully many companies and universities are not at that point. But I think that don't believe the hype in terms of how exactly how transformative this tech can be in the moment. Instead, look at it as an area that you should be experimenting with, using for productivity gains, but don't imagine that you're going to suddenly reinvent a university with half the staff.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, Doug, as we are wrapping up here, I so again appreciate you coming on the Pulse and sharing these insights. I honestly don't know a lot about Eighth Light, and I would love to just give you the floor to kind of talk about what you do and what Eighth Light does for a couple minutes.
Yeah, we're a software development company. We've been around for about 20 years. We have a footprint in many different cities like London, have a lot of people here in Seattle and Los Angeles. We serve a variety of clients, all the way up from one that everybody would know, which is Ticketmaster, down to startup businesses. And really what we specialize in is helping agents get better at software engineering and helping teams build products. So in some cases, that looks like consulting engagements. In some cases, that looks like embedded engineers who are upskilling teams, helping them get better at AI. And in some cases, that's us running end-to-end product development for companies. So
awesome. Cool. Amazing. Well, folks, hey, if you've been listening to this and you're like, I'm doing something cool with Agentic AI, or just in general, you're doing something cool, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that proposals and submissions are open for AMA Higher Ed Symposium this year. I'm on the committee for my second year. I would love to read your proposal about how you are implementing Agentic AI or AI in general within your team. Or maybe there's been a great brand initiative, or you have a different perspective on something else that's going on in your marketing funnel. My gosh, now is the time to get that submission in, and I hope that many of you will consider it, and we look forward to reading those. All right, folks, this was great. Doug, thank you again. And friends, we will catch you next week. Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to the Higher Ed Pulse. The show is a proud member of the Enrollify Network, home to Higher Ed's largest collection of podcasts. Enrollify is where higher ed goes to grow. So be sure to check out our other podcasts, webinars, video clips, blogs, and more. Visit Enrollify.org and subscribe for all the latest details and content drops directly to your inbox. Enrollify is brought to you by Element 451, the digital workforce platform for higher ed. Learn more at element451.com.